Hello and welcome everyone to Joy is a Choice, activating joy for greater purpose and productivity. We are so thrilled to share with you some key insights on this topic, hear from an esteemed panel of experts, and share practical tips on how you guys can activate joy in your own life each and every day. This webinar is live, so hopefully the tech gods will be with us for the duration of the next 60 minutes. Feel free to insert any questions that you might have into the Q&A box found in the navigation bar. We'll be spending the first few minutes of today's webinar sharing insights with you, followed by what I'm sure will be a very interesting and engaging discussion with our panelists. And I should note, we will be sharing a recording of today's session to all registrants, as well as an informative infographic of the data covered today. So keep an eye on your inbox over the next day or two for that communication. So who will we be hearing from today? I'm Lisa Wilding Brown, Chief Research Officer here at InnovateMR. We are a global res tech and sampling agency focused on delivering inclusive and faster insights to the market research ecosystem. I'm joined today by Andrew Cannon, Executive Director at GRBN, but also co-founder and Chief Operating Officer at Quandrum, a purpose-led business building an online platform which empowers people to live more joyfully. Andrew will be sharing some key insights from his research, which was hosted on InnovateMR's Vision platform. Next up is my good pal, Priscilla McKinney, CEO and Mama Bird at Little Bird Marketing, which is focused on community engagement at the intersection of marketing, business, and market research, and of course, joy. We are also joined by Ben Gilgoff, Executive Director of Business Insights Management at Merck & Company. Ben brings a very unique analytical perspective to this topic, specializing in successful brand strategy and employee engagement. And last, but certainly not least, we have with us today, Katja Calhoun, a former market researcher and now licensed psychotherapist who helps her clients with stress, burnout, and negative thought patterns. Katja helps her clients understand how the past can inform and impact how people feel and act today. We are excited for all of these amazing leaders to share their insights with us. So let's get started and do a quick review of our methodology. Quandrum partnered with InnovateMR for these studies. Andrew and the team leveraged our Vision Suite to conduct the fielding and sampled from our firm's proprietary panel, Point Club, which is comprised of highly vetted and engaged survey participants. Quandrum fielded 2 studies capturing participant joyfulness in November through December of 2020, as well as fielded an abridged version of the study in April of 2021. These studies measured 4 key pillars of joyful living, including personal well-being, belonging to community, impact at work and in our personal lives, and fun. In study 1, just under 1,000 Americans 18 plus completed the survey. And in study 2, 1,200 US and UK residents ages 18 plus participated in the study. Now, before we get into the insights, I'd like to take a couple of moments to share that these studies were fielded using our newest collection of next-gen research products, the Vision Suite. Using the Vision Suite, the Quandrum team was able to program their own custom questions, create precise quotas, conduct fielding, manage quality, and generate reports from one consolidated workflow. Building a survey with Vision is incredibly easy, but that doesn't mean it lacks necessary features such as bulk answer uploads, images and videos, quota controls, logic and piping, and various color themes. This intuitive software offers dozens of auto-populated answers, so you don't have to import or type by hand. Next, you can build your ideal audience with advanced targeting, flexible fielding controls, and nested quotas for precise sample delivery from our fully integrated Point Club panel. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And without further ado, I'll get right into these interesting findings and pass it off to Andrew. Andrew? Oh, you're on mute, Andrew.
Never done this before, sorry about that. Thanks, Lisa, and thanks obviously for partnering with us on this. I mean, it was a pleasure working with you and the team, and obviously using the tool certainly was a breeze to get the study fielded and sampled. So thank you for that. I'm just going to run through a few slides, a few of the highlights from the research that we conducted. And the first one really looks at this overall feeling of joy people in the US say they have, and comparing how they felt last November to this April. And I suppose the good news is that there is an uplift in the feeling of joyfulness, the top two box increasing from 34% last November to 40% in April. But if you look down at the bottom of the scale, you can see that there's roughly a similar proportion, 1 in 5, who are feeling just as unjoyful today as people were back in November. So a bit of a difference in some people coming out of last year of the pandemic, as it were, and some people still suffering in terms of their joyfulness. Now, there's a massive data behind this. Just one of the things I'd like to point out at this stage is how important belonging is to this sense of joyfulness, and in particular, this sense of having friends. So, if we looked at last November and we looked at the people who say they're living joyfully, if you looked at people who had 10 or more friends, then half of those would say they were living joyfully. If you looked at people who would say, they have no or very few friends, that drops down to like only 1 in 10. So it's a massive impact on people, that sense of belonging, in particular friendship. But let's look at how the US and the UK compare. If we look at this, we see a huge difference in the top two box scores for the US versus the UK. 40% in the US this April compared to 26%, just over a quarter in the UK. And as you can see, that's because of this rating of 5 on the 7-point scale, where the residents in the UK using that much more than in the US. So the top 3 box is very similar. And we've talked a lot about this finding and the extent to which is that a scale difference or not. And from our previous research, we don't tend to see that much of a scale difference between the UK and the US. And personally, although I do live in Finland, I've experienced through friends and family how tight the lockdown has been and more prolonged in the UK. So I can well imagine that is having an impact. And when you looked at the sense of joyfulness and how that correlates to your perceptions of last year, in the UK, there's a much bigger correlation than there is in the US. So in the UK, if you looked at people who say they're living joyfully, 40% of them said last year was actually pretty good. If you compare that to those who are living or saying they're living unjoyfully in the UK, only 1% say that last year was good. The majority thinking it was a bad year for them. In the US, that difference is there, but it's only half as much pronounced as in the UK. So I think definitely a huge impact on people in the UK in terms of their joyfulness and how they perceived getting through the pandemic living in the UK. If we switch back to look at Americans again and dig into the data a bit deeper, this shows some of the key components of joy that we measured and how Americans feel satisfied or not satisfied on these so-called components of joy. And this analysis is showing basically the gap between the proportion satisfied and not satisfied. So the bigger the gap, the relatively more satisfied people are. And as you can see at the top of the list standing out is people are satisfied with their family relationships. And this is, a good thing because there's a huge correlation between satisfaction with family relationships and a sense of joyful living. Right? It's really clear that those people who perceive that they live joyfully are really satisfied with their relationships. Now, I could talk all day on this chart, but I won't. I'll just pull out a few points. one of the interesting ones to me is emotional well-being, which is sort of in the middle on the chart here. And why that's interesting is that it's a topic that, or it's a thing that many people are working on in their lives. Right? When we ask people, what are you spending your time on? What are you trying to do? And a lot of people tell us that, yes, I am working on my emotional well-being, but it's even more people who are doing that who are not joyful than are actually say they're living joyfully, which is very different from this family relationship or spiritual well-being or even mental well-being. So a lot of people are working on emotional well-being, but they're not necessarily getting the results in terms of feeling joyful at the moment. So that's why I wanted to point that one out, where it is in the middle. And the same with physical well-being. That's even lower down the list. Again, a huge proportion of people say they're actually working on their physical well-being, but relatively they're not satisfied with their lives in terms of their physical well-being at the moment. And then last but not least on this chart, I think I'll point out the relatively low rating of work. It really comes down bottom of the list, this relative satisfaction people have with their work or studies if they're young people. And I think that's, for us in this industry, I think that's a very interesting finding to look at as work changes, as we transition more and more towards remote working. How's that going to change? Is it going to be people going to become more satisfied with their work or less satisfied with their working lives as we transition forward? So I'd like to deep dive a little into work at the moment and to look at, we measured a large number of characteristics, statements about how people feel about their work. And I just want to highlight 3 of them, which the research indicates are very important when it comes to people feeling joyful. And if you look at these 3 elements, I think what's interesting about them is that if you think of it from a leadership perspective, these are all fairly difficult for leaders to manage. These are not easy things for a leader to do, especially in a remote working environment. How does a leader ensure that the people working in the company feel that everybody else in the team, everybody else in the company is inspiring and encouraging? How do you help people who you might not necessarily see face to face ever? How do you make them feel valued at work? And I know I've done a lot of work on trust and how difficult trust relationships are to build. And again, how can you do that as a leader? Compared to other things which aren't so important, not on the chart here, but if you looked at management issues, so, people working towards an agreed goal, people getting positive feedback, these type of management things, they don't necessarily have an impact on joy in the same way that these more softer attributes tend to have. So it's definitely a leadership challenge that I think all leaders need to consider how they're going to adapt to this new world, especially if they're managing a remote workforce. I'd also like to look a little bit at emotional well-being. As I said, that was surprising to me how low it was down on the list of satisfaction compared to some of the other items, given the amount of work and effort people are putting into their emotional well-being. And again, we dive deeply into many aspects of joy and emotional well-being. And these were the 3 factors which came out top when it came to, okay, if we look at people who are living joyfully, how does their emotional well-being differ from those who say they aren't living joyfully? And these are the 3 things that tend to come out. So you have the managing one's own emotions, your self-confidence, and your ability to deal with stressful situations. And what was interesting when you sort of deep dive into the results on this, you see it's especially young people who are struggling with some of these issues. So the one I'll focus on is this feeling stressed. So when we looked at people in the 18 to 34-year-old bracket, almost half of the people in that group said they're feeling stressed all or most of the time. Okay, that figure drops down from 46%, which it was, to 22% amongst 35 to 44-year-olds. So people, once they get to that next stage, a much lower level of stress than the young people. And again, a huge challenge for leaders with young people coming into the workforce. If they're already feeling stressed from studying, if they're already feeling stressed in the life, how do you create a work environment where they're feeling less stressed at work, at least? So I think that's interesting to see how some of this emotional well-being is really a challenging issue for the young adults in the population in the US. So to sort of wrap up the findings here, because I don't want to go too far down the track of talking. Those who know me know I could talk about this all day and all week, but I really want to get my part over with so the panel can be let loose and give their insights into what we're going to talk about today. But before I do that, I really want to challenge the audience, everybody listening today, to just have a think about, what can you do to be more joyful today? We know the power of joy, not only for oneself, but how it impacts those around you, whether that's family, friends, co-workers. Having a joyful disposition has a huge impact both on yourselves and others. So, my challenge to you is, what can you do today to be more joyful? So have a think about that after the webinar, and please share with us on social at #joyfulliving or #joy as a choice. And we'd love to hear what you come up with as your tips for how you're living more joyfully, and how others could do that today as well. So thank you for sharing that. So the three themes we're going to focus on today, we could have chosen many themes, but we thought these three are particularly important when it comes to not only to joy, but also to joy and work. So we're going to be talking about belonging, this sense of genuine belonging and community. We'll be talking about consciousness in terms of leadership and authentic leadership. And finally, we'll wrap up on this big issue of emotional well-being and how that relates especially to resiliency. So I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful 45 minutes or so left in the webinar to deep dive into these issues. So let's get the panel back up and welcome them all back. Let me see if I can get them all visible. They're all there. Hello, wonderful panel. How are you all today?
Great. Thanks for having us. This is such a cool topic. And I'm ready to talk, but I'm ready to learn.
Well, as luck would have it, Priscilla, you get to talk first and learn afterwards. So we couldn't think of a better person to talk about community and belonging than you, right? Especially how it relates to things. So, you've seen the research, obviously much more broadly about the topic than that. And I suppose the first question is, when you think about belonging, community, what can people do to cultivate a better sense of this genuine belonging in their life?
You're right. I do love this topic. And something that people know about me is that I'm the CEO of a marketing company. What they don't know about me is that I have my degree in cultural anthropology. So when I think about systems of belonging and how humans self-organize for mutual benefit, I know a thing or two there. But what almost no one knows about me, at least not in polite society, is that my life, I grew up as a missionary kid overseas, and I grew up singing in a matching dress And in my role in my life as an amateur puppeteer, I've learned a little thing about belonging. So maybe that's like the most bizarre entry into belonging, but I think it'll connect here if you hear me out. So I'm the fifth of 5 girls. And growing up like that, yes, performing puppet shows. So I know I'm going to hear a lot about this on social media. One of the interesting things about being a family caught in a different culture, and even when we would come home and be caught in a culture that really wasn't our own either, you really had to understand the sense of belonging. You had to understand what is community. I don't belong right now in Europe because to Europeans, I'm American. I don't belong to Americans because they think I'm too European, and this conundrum happens all the time. And that's an easy way to see it, but it's happening to everybody on many levels, right? So as the fifth of 5 girls, I also happen to go to 4 different high schools in 3 different countries. So that's just further belabors the point of I've got to have my people. And changing schools every year, I had to know I had to get very aggressive, and I had to be very purposeful about building a community that would sustain me, even if that community was only going to last for 9 months, right? So the easy thing for me, there's some things that are easy, some things that are hard. I did have a built-in gang. I mean, I'll give you that. Five sisters is a force to be reckoned with. Right. But I don't care if you call it family or friends or your chicas or your buds or your colleagues or maybe a circle of nerdy friends or whatever you call it, you need a tribe. 100%, you need a tribe. And so you ask okay, how do we go about doing that? Well, one of the things that strikes me at the core of belonging and creating community is this sense that I need help. And I'm gonna get a little emotional when you gave that information about these young people being so stressed. That is really hard for me, to take in. They are that stressed. Part of that comes from this idea of maybe they feel alone. This is something brand new that is happening. And it's so much easier to deal with it when you feel, okay, there's someone else here to walk me through with it. And I think a barrier to joy is when you don't feel like you have a group. You feel, you can't get to that point where you feel like you do have people, right? And like any great group, a tribe rallies for you when you do feel that stressed, right? But unfortunately, another barrier to joy and community and belonging, in my opinion, is this mentality that we label each other. I'm either someone who helps or someone who gets help. And I think we saw that a lot during COVID. Oh, I'm a helper. Oh, okay, I'm stressed out, so someone's helping me. This dichotomy and this breakdown of labeling ourselves really limits joy, because in one moment I could be someone who really can get in and help somebody. In another moment, I could be falling apart. And I think we experience this very much, like you didn't know you were on the edge, and then all of a sudden something happened. You're like, I can't take this pandemic anymore, right? So this barrier to community, in my opinion, comes from labeling ourselves that we're someone who helps and someone who gets help. It's not mutually exclusive. And the reality is that we all know over time that the depth of friendship comes from, the highs and the lows, and of being the giver and of being the recipient, of something. And in order for a tribe to rally for you, you need a bat signal. You got to call your tribe. You got to admit you need help. And when I think about that, those stressed, young people, they haven't had as many, opportunities to say, hey, I need help. People, they're younger and everybody thinks they're so resilient, but they haven't had enough experience over time to be able to easily say, hey, I'm in a bad situation. And I think that is where we can come in with community. And I'll kind of end with this. And I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say about this. But we all know that depth of friendship comes from helping and from giving, right? And if you don't believe me, ask any parent, on Christmas morning. There's so much joy that comes from giving, to other people. And I think this, in some ways, I don't know if this is going to sound weird, but I think in a lot of ways I was more prepared for COVID than a lot of people were, because I do feel I've spent a lot of time cultivating a tribe and cultivating community. But also back in 2011, living here in Joplin, we went through as a community an F5 tornado, the only one on record in the US. And within 22 minutes, we lost 35% of our town.
Right.
And 3 weeks later, I stood on the sidewalk watching my creative studio burn to the ground. So in that moment, I looked around me and I had so many people on my sidewalk. I had just spent 3 weeks helping so many colleagues. Help who you can, when you can, as much as you can, as best you can, right? I did not know that 3 weeks later, I'd be standing on that sidewalk saying, now I'm the person who needs help. And I asked for help and I got it. And so that's kind of where I would end that sense of belonging, is that I feel like I was a little bit more prepared for COVID. I was able to jump in right at the beginning and be that helper, because I really understood that you could be both, and I wasn't going to label myself only as one. And I could speak to that to people, like, you're not alone. I'm right here. I'm okay for right now, and I can help you. So to me, that wraps up like community and belonging, and where I think my real belief and my 100% commitment into making a tribe before you think you need one.
Yeah, that's amazing, Priscilla. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. I mean, I'm so touched by how you're feeling about the young people. And I think, you know, one of the challenges I see on that is that, especially in America, where it's this strength as an individual is so, you know, put on an accolade. You know, it's the winner is the number one, right? And you have to be that strong person. You can't show your weaknesses and that. But I'd like to bring Ben in now, because you talked about puppets and not many people knowing you about puppets, and maybe not many people know about Ben. He's also a soccer coach. And, you know, when you think about community and belonging, you know, I'm sure you see things in that field that you could well talk about here.
Yeah, so thanks. I think, you know, what was so interesting about the research was just, I don't know if you recall, but like fun was the last thing on the list, right? And perhaps not surprising. And so what I took away from it is that joy has taken a real hit, right? And I don't think we needed a headline to understand that. I think everybody feels that. I think people see it. We've all been faced with challenges, some that we were prepared for and some that we really weren't prepared for. As Andrew says, I wear a lot of different hats. I mean, obviously I work at a very large organization, and then, you know, in my spare time, one of the things I like to do to volunteer is coach, you know, youth soccer. And I've been doing it for a number of years. And it's interesting to me how the dynamics have changed actually during the pandemic, because, you know, there were times where people had to, you know, wear masks, and sometimes when the kids had to wear masks and didn't, and, you know, a lot of fear and trepidation, and something that was kind of normal got taken away. And, you know, we all kind of wear this, I think, badge where we're going to continue, right? I mean, that touches on the resilience piece of this, right? So I think whenever I'm in a leadership position, whether it's coaching, you know, professionally, or coaching, you know, youth soccer, I think there's a lot of tenets that are really similar. One, you know, you kind of have to provide a path that it's okay to react, right? And we talked a lot about managing emotions, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have emotion, right? And people, you know, are very keen to say, okay, well, manage it. It's like, okay, sure, you're going to manage it, but you're going to feel it first, right? You're going to feel not so great. You're going to feel unsure. You're going to feel anxiety. You're going to feel uncertain, right? And that's natural, right? But you have to let that happen to you, and then think about what you want to do with it, right? I mean, for some people, it's crippling. For other people, they understand that that's an initial kind of reaction, and then they're going to move into something else or do something with that to make it productive for them. And I think as whatever type of coaching, you know, that we're talking about, that's our role as a guide, right? We need to guide people, you know, through that kind of initial reaction, whatever it is, right, and help them try to do something, you know, positive with that. It's not to deny what they're feeling, right? It's just to say, okay, I understand that. the other thing too that I recognize is that we're dealing with so many different groups of people now, right? So many different generations are working professionally, right? And each one of those generations needs something a little bit different depending on what the situation is. And so I think it's important to be sensitive not only to that, but just how varied people's lives are now, right? So for example, in my group, we have single people working in large cities who feel isolated. We have people who are at home stuck with, younger children who also feel isolated because they can't get away from their children. And it's so much, goes on there. We have folks that are, adopting pets, right? There's just all sorts of things. We have divorced folks that, sometimes have their kids and sometimes don't, right? There's this whole very wide range of situations. And so I think what I find myself doing is constantly challenging my aperture, right? Because it's getting wider and wider. The world is getting, a lot more varied, and we have to be prepared to deal with a lot of, different situations and situations that we can't even, maybe predict or project. So I think, what I would say, helps me is just to try to, be a little bit more empathetic. And also understanding that I might not have seen this before, right? In situations where we've seen, when we've been in similar situations, it's easier to move through them quickly, but we also have to give ourselves permissions as leaders to say, okay, I may not know exactly what this is or what this person needs in this moment, but I'm going to give myself a little bit of time to try to figure that out. And hopefully that translates into a good, result. And I think if people feel heard, we're already on the right track, right? It's not always about, solutions oriented approaches, but just trying to make people feel heard a little bit is always a good first step.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben. And I was looking at some of these comments coming through and some of those around tribes and things like that. I mean, I think it was interesting when you looked at the combination of the research and this joyfulness and friends. And it seems that 5 seems to be a magic number. That, the people who have less than 5 friends seem to be much less joyful than those who have more than 5. You don't need hundreds, right? But you need some form of tribe, some form of mini group who can help you. But I'd like to bring Katja in at this point, and maybe Katja, one of the words that Priscilla mentioned that I thought you could pick up on is generosity, and how that could play into this concept of belonging and community.
Yeah, thank you. Gosh, so I want to step back for a second and kind of lay a foundation and then come back to generosity. When I thought about joy and belonging as well, and all the things that are related to that, I thought there are really 2 conditions that need to be met. And they sound very simple, but they're actually not. The first condition is you have to be present to experience joy, to experience connection, to be generous. And it sounds kind of duh, like, yeah, of course you have to be present. But the truth is that a lot of us, even without knowing, spend a lot of time in the past or in the future. A lot of the time we're not aware of that. And this can range from we're planning, we're anticipating, right? We're projecting, and some of that we have to do professionally, to more of, someone who deals with anxiety might be very fearful of things happening, or we're ruminating about the past. We're reflecting on what we've done wrong or perceive we've done wrong. So we're really away from the present moment and from the moments where joy happens, right? So Priscilla, for example, talked about these big events, whether they're positive or difficult or challenging. We usually show up really well for those, right? We go into survival mode and, we rally around. But what really makes or breaks us are the small moments. And that's where joy happens. Soccer, Ben talked about that, right? There are so many moments for joy, and of course also disappointment and also the whole range of emotions. Your dog doing something funny, your child doing something funny, somebody being courteous, somebody paying it forward. All these are moments where we can experience joy and where we can experience belonging. But if we're not present, if we haven't trained our mind, we miss out on that. And so we miss out on the joy. And then again, if there are mental health challenges, and there are a lot of people who suffer from depression, from anxiety, this becomes even harder. And the negativity bias is even stronger. We already have that, but it becomes even stronger and we feel even less joy.
Yeah.
So that's the first condition. The second one, and Ben actually already talked about this beautifully, and Priscilla touched on it also, and we heard it in your presentation, is the ability to be with a wide range of emotions. So we have a tendency to label certain emotions as negative, and we want to push them away. We don't want to feel them. And so I saw a comment coming through about grief, right? Grief is so difficult, and society doesn't do a good job with grief, right? And then there's a tendency, okay, we push it away. But the challenge is, if we push particular emotions away, we push it all away. Yeah, it's a wholesale deal. We can't selectively decide, oh, you know what, I don't want to feel anxiety, but I do want to feel joy. Yeah, it would be nice, but our brains don't work that way. So if we numb everything. So feeling joy, feeling belonging, being able to be generous, which actually means that our cup has to be a little bit full, right? We can't give from an empty cup. We need to be present for all emotions. And one way to do that is to build a mindfulness practice. So to really practice being mindful, and to practice mindfulness for all emotions. And that's challenging, right? That is really challenging because, again, we don't want to feel the negative stuff, what we call negative, what I call unpleasant usually. So I could say much, much more.
Yeah.
And I had a little experiment, but I know I'm running out of time. So I'm just going to invite people to practice ways to be present with everything. And out of that comes the ability to be generous, because you're going to notice the right moment. You're going to notice, here's the moment to be generous. And actually, here's the moment to step back and take care of myself first. So be generous toward myself, which is just as important, right?
Yeah, that is so important. Well, thank you, Katja. I mean, we are going to swing back to you. Don't worry about that, but we do have 2 more topics that we need to get through. So I'll move on to those. I'll just wrap this one up with saying one thing that somebody wise said to me, to really do every now and again a friend audit, and to sort of check in to see whether your friends are actually lifting you up or pulling you down, right? And at some point, you're going to let some people go. Right, you're just going to do that audit and you realize this person just isn't lifting me up at the moment. They're in fact bringing me down. And at some point, you might want to let those people go with blessing and love. But you know, if they're no longer in your tribe, in your direction, then it's maybe time to say goodbye. And that's hard for some people. But again, that's a little tip for people to think about. But let's switch and let's talk about work, because we all love work. And as we saw, the work was down there on the bottom 3 in terms of joyfulness. And Ben, I know, you know, as a leader in Merck, it's something that you work with, you know, every day. And as we showed, a lot of those challenges with joy are around leadership and not management. So how do you, as a leader, how do you create more joy at work?
Yeah, so I should say I only have hypotheses. I think some days I'm more successful than others, and some days are really not good. And you can ask anybody on my team. I think they would be honest about that, and I accept that. You know, I think as a leader, you know, sometimes, you know, you feel all this pressure, right? You want people to be joyful. You want people to have meaningful work. You want people to have you know, that joy that comes from that sense of purpose. But the reality of it is that this format that we're all kind of working in, for better or for worse, is really challenging to this extent, right? And you know, like there was this old saying, like anything in excess is no good, right? And now we're all on WebExes for the most part, pretty excessively. So, you know, I think part of it is like, yes, the technology is great and we are in a terrible situation and this technology has enabled us to stay more connected, and all those things are true, but it's also worn on people quite a bit, right? And so I think we have to give ourselves a little bit of, license to feel that, right? And recognize that. As far as like joy at work right now, it's been challenging. We've done some things like we had, a virtual baby shower, right? Where we kind of all got together and we had all this stuff sent to a teammate's house, and she was able to kind of receive them and open things, and it was good. It wasn't as fun as like all being in a room together and having cake and actually being together as a unit, but that's not on the table right now, right? So as a leader, you have to say, look, this isn't on the table. I can't do this the way I normally would. What can I do? And whether it's as good as what it would have been another way is inconsequential. The fact is that you're trying to do something, and maybe it'll work, and maybe you'll learn something else that works, and maybe it won't work, and that'll be okay too, right? So I learn a lot by making mistakes. That fuels the next great idea, right? And so I think we have to try different things and give ourselves permission, knowing that we have kind of limited, capacity right now to do things. But, I thought it was great that we even tried to do something like that. We've experimented with coffee chats. We've experimented with, impromptu get-togethers, like kind of a cocktail hour, late day coffee sessions. So we've tried a number of different formats. And what I notice and what I always say to people is you don't get everybody. Some people like the coffee chats, some people don't. Some people like the impromptus, some people don't. So I think especially now, we have to give ourselves a little bit of permission to try different things and understand that it's not all going to be great for everybody. And by the way, there's still some folks I just pick up the phone and just call them, right? Some people that works, just fine. So, be open to experimentation and figuring out what works for different people, and try your best, but, also don't beat yourself up either, because there's no simple solution out there.
All right, thanks, Ben. Priscilla, I know you also deal with a lot of different companies, and you see this from a lot of different perspectives, and you see good leaders and maybe not so good leaders in the field struggling with today's world. So how do you see sort of work and leadership and joy?
Yeah. I think that our society is so hell-bent on there being a point to something. And I just don't think that joy is always something that it has a point, right? And to Katja's, the thought, it is about very small things. And so one way as a leader that I have tried to cultivate joy is to do some of these more maybe bizarre things, like there's not a point. And I get very strange responses back sometimes when I say to people I met on LinkedIn, oh, well, let's have 3 or 4 or 5 of us. We'll have, a glass of wine and we'll chat, and I'll come with some questions, or I'll come with a game, or I'll come with something. And like, well, okay. And then we'll do business. Like, no, this is all there is. Like, this is the point. Like, we don't have to always know exactly where that 45 minutes is going. If I ask somebody to like a wind down or something like that, which I'm very apt to do, Lisa knows, I just get people together some way, but there doesn't have to be an agenda, and there doesn't have to be this point. Like, why did we go to that? I don't know. It's okay to not know what's going to happen next. Like that's possible. And there's some joy in that serendipity of like, I just thought about a couple of questions, that we could ask, but they were absolutely nothing related to work, and just something that could be, really fun. But you have to open yourself up to that. And I noticed there was a comment earlier that someone said, this is so much harder as an adult. Right. And on one hand, I agree. On the other hand, I disagree. It's just that we're less inclined to do it, and maybe that is harder. And I'm not trying to, parse these words out, but think about it as a kid, it was just as hard to walk across the room. It's just that we were a little bit more aware of what we stood to gain. And so I think sometimes thinking about some of your great friends you've had, or great moments that you have, looking at it and just saying, some of it was serendipitous. And I know we're all missing that. Like, think about conferences and, met someone in the hall, and, it's just not happening for us, but you can create serendipity. And so as a leader, sometimes I think it's like what Ben said, it's like everybody's looking to you for an answer. I might have the wrong one. I'm going to fail. It's okay. But then I might call a meeting and I don't have to have all of those answers. And I also don't have to have an exact agenda. We could just get together and see if, 5 people, 5 adults might have something interesting to talk about.
I totally agree with you, Priscilla. I mean, some of the best moments from the last 12 plus months have been things that have just sort of popped up and been really spontaneous. And there's just been a lot of really wonderful collaboration and otherwise very, very difficult year. And I know I shared with you guys, this has been a brutal year for my family. My mother-in-law got diagnosed with terminal cancer. My father-in-law died unexpectedly of an aneurysm. My dad has been diagnosed with cancer. There's been a lot of grief. And I know I saw that in the comment box around grief and how to handle that and be in a working environment and still finding joy. And, I think Katja touched on it. Like, joy is in those little moments, and it's possible to have multiple emotions happening at one time, right? I can be incredibly sad and feel a lot of grief for what might be happening, but I can have a really joyful moment with my colleague, and so it's one of those things where I think I don't even think it's related to being American. I think it's just part of being human. Like, we want to plan everything. We want to be able to control everything. I mean, I think I was even saying that to you guys before we jumped on to this webinar. It's like, if I plan for every worst case scenario, then I can somehow get control of something that I have no control over, right? But it just, looking back over the last year, I think it's just about, looking for opportunities to collaborate and partner and do fun things like this. Like, this is just something that we all kind of came together and said, let's talk about joy. Normally I'm talking about cyber fraud and blockchain technology and participant trust, but no, I want to talk about joy. I'm not a ninja at it. I'm not perfect at it, but I know that it's something I can make a concerted effort to really try to take those moments and recognize them, because otherwise I'm just going like a mile a minute and I can miss out. And I'd said that in the chat too, just sort of living in the future, like what I'm going to do, where I'm going, what conference I'm going to attend. And so I think it's just reflecting back in the last few months, there's just been a lot of really great opportunities for joy. So it's been good, even though simultaneously there's been some tough things to deal with too.
Definitely. That was an interesting comment just from Lisa Corte, just saying there that cyber fraud is fun too. And I think
So true.
Flippant, the concept that you bring fun into every day, you don't sort of have it as a separate thing, right? You embed it in everything you're doing. You release that inner child regularly and don't just save it for Friday afternoons at 4 o'clock, but you do it. But let's get on to this last important topic. I know, again, we could continue this webinar forever, and hopefully we will get a chance to do a follow-up on this, because this is so fun. But really, I want to bring Katja center stage to talk to us, about emotional well-being, not only related to work and stress, but, in general as well. It's such a big issue, and you dedicated your life to it now. So thank you, obviously, for making that shift to do that, to the detriment of some of the brands who no longer get your talents, but humanity is thanking you for that choice. So go ahead. Do you tell us about joy and emotional well-being, please?
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, it's interesting. I was reflecting on what Priscilla said earlier, the community, and I left the market research community and I didn't fully realize what an amazing community it is until I had left it, although I feel I still kind of belong. But that brings me, actually, as I was reflecting on that, and thank you, Lisa, for bringing me onto this, really appreciate that. But that made me reflect on something that we can actually practice and that really helps to amplify joy, and that's gratitude and actually noticing what we have, right? Again, I go back to negativity bias, which is a very real thing. We have that for a real reason. We have it for survival reasons. And it's a big challenge, especially in our modern day life, where we typically don't deal with, life or death survival, although it does happen. So the idea of practicing gratitude for what we have is really a powerful antidote to a lot of difficult emotions. And it really also helps to amplify joy. And for me, it was so insightful because I looked at it and I was like, wow, I was part of this amazing community. And I didn't realize how amazing it was until I left it, because as a psychotherapist, there's a lot of solo providers. People don't network. I go to conferences and people don't network. Therapists are weird. We're weird. So it's like people don't network the way we do in consumer insights and market research. So thinking about resilience, thinking about well-being, training our mind to focus on gratitude is powerful, and not in a shaming way. Sometimes we can take it to, well, I should be grateful because look at what I have. And then it actually makes us feel worse, especially when dealing with a difficult situation, whether it's grief or depression or just the pandemic. It's not a should. It's really that noticing in small ways, oh, what can I be grateful for? Like this morning, when I thought about this, I had this realization about being part of this incredible community and how really beautiful it is. Here is this webinar, and we spent 2 hours together, the panelists, talking about this and preparing. And each time we got together, we said, oh, it's probably going to just be half an hour, and an hour later we're still talking. The second one I wanted to talk about is that there are two components to mindfulness. And I saw a question come up earlier, how do I practice being present? And that obviously goes beyond the scope of this. But I want to sort of put a bug in your ear that there's these two components to mindfulness. And we often forget that. Two wings of a bird, so to speak, awareness and compassion. So awareness without compassion can be cold and clinical and judgmental, right? And so if we add compassion to it, it really downregulates and soothes our nervous system, which is very powerful. And it also helps to deal with these difficult emotions like grief, like anger, like frustration, like stress, and whatever else it might be. And compassion, and then I'll end, is not easy for a lot of us, right? If you didn't get a lot growing up, or, we're not necessarily in a very compassionate society, especially as of late, right? So here again, the tribe comes in handy that Priscilla has talked about, and all of us really have talked about, is to have somebody remind you of it. Get somebody who knows you, who reminds you to be compassionate, or ask yourself, how would I talk to a good friend? What would I say to a good friend in this situation? Because we are often harsher to ourselves than we are to anyone else, right? The way we talk to ourselves, we probably wouldn't talk to anyone. So I'll leave you with those two: gratitude and then awareness plus compassion, and get somebody to work with you on that. Get a meditation buddy or someone else who can help you bring that compassion back into your life.
I would just follow that up with, I love what you're saying about this. You should feel this. You should feel that. Oh my gosh, that is like such language we use with ourselves and we use to other people. I mean, think about how much time as a parent this comes out of your mouth, right? So this, I should do this, I should do this. And then also as our society of doers, the next thing is task. Okay, so I'm going to meditate at this time and I'm going to do it. And all this comes like, okay, coming out of this meaningful conversation, I think it's important for us to understand that doesn't mean now put on Tuesday, put another thing on your calendar to write on your gratitude journal. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm saying piling it on top and like now, okay, I'm going to make it a task and that's what's going to solve this. No, it's not. We are very averse to flow in this society, right? And so if we think this is a good idea, then we are going to structure this. And to Ben's point, something in excess is not a good thing. So, just because something helps you right now, what Katja's saying is a self-soothing. This might help you right now, but 2 weeks later, maybe you don't need the self-soothing. Maybe you need someone to kind of go get a friend in your tribe that kicks you in the pants and gets you to do the next thing. But it's that awareness that you're talking about that's so deep of saying, I need to be aware of what it is that I need. And I need to fight that, resist that urge to just now go codify it and go do it. And I'm going to, be a good soldier. That's not going to bring joy.
So I can't create a standard operating procedure for Joy?
No, and also I'm in your tribe. I won't let you.
Definitely not, Lisa, definitely not. Yeah, I think the gratitude thing is so important, but as you say, it can't become this sort of by route thing that you need to do. It's how to do it.
Mhm.
Oh, I think we lost Andrew. He got frozen there for a second. Maybe he'll come back. Yeah, you know, it's something you guys touched on. I was thinking about. I think there's been a change or a shift that I've seen. Like, I know, Priscilla, you're really active on LinkedIn. You're sort of the golden poster child for what it is to be an incredible presence on LinkedIn and just connecting with people. And you've introduced me to a ton of people this last year, and I've been paying that forward. I've just been like matchmaking people I like all the time, just sort of saying, you know what, I like you. I need to connect you with so-and-so. And I think what I've observed on LinkedIn, and it's interesting because one of our mutual contacts had posted something over the weekend about his wife's anniversary with him, their marriage, and they're raising a special needs child. And my son happens to have autism as well. And it really resonated with me. I actually wasn't connected with him at the time, but I liked I liked and commented because it really touched me. I just feel like there's so much authenticity and realness and humanity that I'm observing in otherwise very business-like settings that we didn't see pre-pandemic. Like, even the things I've shared with all of you and everyone listening in, I probably wouldn't have done that 12 plus months ago because I didn't think I had sort of the agency or the license to talk about such personal things in a business setting. And so I think there's just been, I feel like that's almost like a silver lining that's come out of this pandemic, not only more family time, but just more humanity, more realness, more authenticity, and really open dialogue about mental health and wellness and joy and you know, who has it, who doesn't, how do we get it? I just love that. I hope we don't lose that once the world really starts to open up and we get back into that flow, even if we're uncomfortable with the flow, right?
We won't let it go. We won't let it go. Ben, can I bring you back in just to talk a little bit about humanity and how you see that in the corporate world of that, you know, you're very much a part of, and you've got obviously people coming into work who you probably haven't met even personally, right? And how that becomes a challenge of connecting with these people as humans.
Yeah, and I also want to touch on something that was said too about just the trends, right, of showing up. At least it was saying, like, you know, there's stuff that I would do now that I wouldn't have even done 12 months ago. Okay, that's true. But think about how the last 10 years and for some of us 20 plus, right? I mean, there's things that you would never say at work. That's what we were taught, right? And now you can say, you know, everything and encouraged to say everything. So I think, you know, kind of that freeing feeling is great. And I think a lot of organizations are trying to get a little bit more comfortable in those shoes. You know, to be honest, I think that the intention is there. And I think that there's a lot of, you know, well-intended programs, et cetera, that designed to support that. But I think, and I think that's great, but I think as individuals, we have to kind of support it as well, right? And try to figure out, you know, what is it that, you know, people need to feel comfortable to speak up and to be themselves, right? We hear all this, you know, chatter about authenticity at work and you know, being who we are, and you know, there's a lot of fear still out there, especially, you know, when you look at things that happen in the news and you know, the constant you know, fear that people have for good reason, right? It's not imaginary, right? People see a lot and they are fearful. So I think, you know, creating safe spaces, you know, creating, you know, ideas that you know, are different than yours are always a good idea. Encouraging people, you know, to be themselves, trying to get people to, you know, comfortable in revealing a little bit more about themselves. It's been a struggle for me. I don't love it, right? I don't love revealing to people everything, you know, about myself. It's not the most comfortable feeling. I'm trying to get better. I'd like to continue to get better, and hopefully I will, but it's not intuitive to me, you know, to just to put that out there. It doesn't mean I can't try to get better. So I think we're on the right path. You know, I also say to myself, and I don't know if others do this, I also shield myself a little bit. There's a point in the afternoon where the news goes off. There will be no more news flowing into, you know, that's it. Like, that's it. That's what I can absorb for the day. I've got the basic gist of what happened. Thank you. I'm going to spend some time thinking about what this means for me, or I'm going to go, you know, try to do something that I can influence over, because again, it can overwhelm you, and it could really steal your joy, right? And so that's something that I think people should also feel, you know, comfortable with doing, with saying, okay, this is enough for me. I'm good at this point.
Yeah.
Turn it on.
Ben, I would totally, I just love what you're saying there. I think that psychological safety is so big. And to a little bit to Katja's point, you know, about people who are struggling with depression and really cannot break out and like make these choices in the way that they would want to. This is such a big piece of that puzzle. And I think just starting the conversation in your office of, what does psychological safety mean to you? What does that look like? Because it's not necessarily the same thing for me as it is for someone else. And there's been a lot of talk on this about the need to just be able to be yourself and be in your grief or be in whatever it is that you're feeling. I think just starting more conversations about psychological safety. And it's as easy as psychological safety at the beginning of a meeting. Anyone? Thoughts, you know, and not dictating where it is that it needs to go, but it would be so cool to hear from your team what is needed. And as Andrew pointed out, it really grips me looking at these stats about how much young people are suffering with anxiety. And, you know, it is a different world that they're trying to navigate very initial parts of their careers in. And we need to understand that that's difficult.
Yeah. No, it's an amazing thing, you know, and it's, as Ben mentioned, the fear. You know, I was reminded that when you look at the data on fear, you know, it's basically, people think it started with COVID. You know, it really started with 9/11. So, you know, if you're 20 years old, you basically know nothing but fear all your life. You've been brought up in an atmosphere of fear for the last 20 years. And that must have a huge impact on these young people, right? Because their parents have told them the whole time, don't go out there, it's dangerous, right? You can't do that, it's not safe. So they've been brought up with that whole environment at home, and now going into the workplace and having that, and a huge burden on leaders to make them feel safe, as you say, to create that safe space for them. It's a huge thing. I don't think we're trained well enough as leaders to understand, let alone deal with that, have the tools to deal with that. But maybe that's a subject for another webinar. I know we are over time, and we could go on forever, and I'm just amazed how many people are still here, even though we're over time, which I think just shows you how important this topic and how passionate people are about this topic. So, I mean, I'm going to thank from my heart the panelists for being on the show today, and I'm going to thank Lisa for being such a star, and obviously your colleagues, Lisa, who, you know, worked with us but also financed the gig to get the research done. You know, big thank you from my heart.
Oh, absolutely. We were so thrilled to get this amazing group together and to run the research. And I think this is just the first of many new collaborations and discussions that we're going to be having about this topic. So, and I love putting a pin in psychological safety. I feel like that's the next topic that we really need to dive deeply into. But I'd like to thank everyone for attending, for staying over time. I hope this was helpful. Definitely reach out to us on LinkedIn. We would love all of us to hear from you. And I'll be looking for those hashtags. Hopefully you got that homework note, and we're going to see some great sharing online. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great evening ahead.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Stay joyful. Stay joyful.